Hi, I'm Cody Rue. This is Church of Logic, and now part 3 of ordinal analysis with Phil Zucker. Okay, but back to the original question, which is, so there's two things, right? Can you imagine that the system without cut is sort of straightforwardly consistent? Because there's just no way to get false. And B, do you understand that process of, at least conceptually, you start with a system where there's cuts, you assign an ordinal, which is going to bound the number of steps you have to take to eliminate all the possible cuts. And therefore, you can go from a system with cut in a finite number of steps to a system without cuts. And therefore, the original system had to have been consistent.
I understand the idea of, you're saying cut is a derived inference rule, but in kind of a subtler way. You could have a couple of inference rules and you chain 3 rules together, and now I call that rule foo. And that's a derived rule, and because it can just be expanded in terms of the other rules, that new system is you didn't need to have that rule because you could just replace that with 3 applications of the other rules. But cut is a more complicated thing than just it's a combination of 3 rules. It's kind of confusing or complicated how to eliminate the cut out of the...
Yeah. But I'm not saying I'm going to tell you how to eliminate the cut. I'm saying conceptually, if you have a proof that involves cut, I claim that there is another proof that doesn't involve cut of the same thing.
Right.
And it doesn't matter how I get from one to the other. I just know that the number of steps I'm going to take is going to make some ordinal go down at each step.
So you are saying ordinals are involved in the termination argument of it. There is a syntax tree for proofs that I could give you. I could write a computer program that would start that its purpose, something that's pushing negations around, putting it in a negation normal form or some other normal form. And this is the cut elimination normal form, I guess. There is a computer program that can do that. We'll take in that tree and output a new tree that has no cuts and is still a valid proof. And I need to prove that algorithm terminates in order to say that always terminates on every tree and also produces a cut-free tree that proves the same thing.
Correct.
And follows the same rules. The termination argument of that function is difficult. And crucial, I guess.
Yes. For first order logic, and this is sort of the punchline I wanted to get. For first order logic, the termination argument of that procedure involves lexicographic pairs of certain numbers associated to that proof. And so if you believe that a lexicographic order is well-founded over the nats, then you must believe that this procedure terminates. And then it's pretty easy to show that this procedure eliminates cuts.
Okay. And then this is all predicated on the assumption that this thing that you've been vague enough about that I don't really understand it, that the cut-free version is obviously consistent.
Way to undermine my...
Well, I don't understand that in the slightest, because, I guess you'd have to start looking at the rules of this thing without cuts to, and then explain to me why you think it's impossible to prove false out of this thing.
Sure. I think that's a worthwhile endeavor. So there's 2 things that I need to explain, right? Why is the cut-free system consistent? And how do I actually describe that procedure that takes a system with cuts and produces a system without cuts? I think that second one is the complicated one, right? The first one is sort of uniform. You can do it for first order logic. You can do it for arithmetic, and it all kind of works. It's not trivial, but it is sort of reasonable. And then the second one, how you assign the ordinals and how you describe the process for eliminating cuts. That's the fiddly bit. And that bit gets harder and harder as you move towards more and more powerful systems. Describing the ordinal becomes hard. Describing the process becomes hard. Whereas for, is the cut-free system consistent, that always kind of stays the same. It never gets really complicated, even for second order logic, right? Which is, complicated conceptually. The proof that the cut-free system is consistent is still the same. And you can still prove it using, weak systems and simple arguments.
Well, if this original system's so great, why are you bothering to throw cut into it?
It's not you That's a good question, I think. If the original system without cut is so great, why are you throwing cut into it? The answer is, basically, you can't use that system to actually prove things. You're going to end up doing tons and tons of work. And in some sense, that has to be the case, right? Because the cut elimination process is going to make these proofs way, way bigger. And you can even show that there are some proofs that have to be long if they don't have cuts. And they get to be short if you do have cuts.
Well, I sort of vaguely thought of cut as, I'm not sure why, as some kind of like a sharing mechanism, as some kind of like, I'm allowed to like abstract away some subfunction or something.
It's definitely an abstraction mechanism.
Yeah, and so that lets you like share vast parts of this huge cut eliminated proof tree, and then you get to compact like some very similar parts into this sub piece, which is using this cut rule. But I don't really understand how.
Well, okay.
Where that picture comes from.
So there's an analogy between, and we're probably gonna have to wrap it up. But there's an analogy between a cut and a lambda, right? The thing we've been dancing around with this BHK interpretation and talking about, cuts and cut elimination and substitution is that in natural deduction, in the proofs as propositions, the proofs as programs interpretation, if you have an A implies B, that's a function type. And if you did that by an introduction, then that's really a lambda. And then if you have a certain particular A, then that's an argument to that function. And getting that B out of that is an application. So if the first one was an introduction, it's a lambda, and the second one is a B, then applying that is applying a lambda to an argument. And then the process by which I eliminate that, which is not a cut, but is the analogy of a cut in this proof system, is just by substituting that argument. Substituting, the lambda x, I replace all the x's by that argument. But you see that's very useful to have a lambda x, where x is just a variable. This is very much like a let binding, right? Where you name the argument a, which might be very complicated. You name it, you give it just a single x, which you can use as many times as you want. And it's sort of like atomic. And of course, that argument itself might have a bunch of lambdas in there too. And those lambdas might take in arguments. And if you want to reduce those, you see that things can really, really grow in kind of an uncontrolled way. And the theorem here is that it must be that way. If you want to prove these things without any lambdas at all ever, you're going to end up with this huge, huge thing, because you have to replace everything by its definition everywhere recursively. And that replacement itself can beget other replacements.
Yeah, so in the proofs as programs analogy, the proof term corresponding to a cut is a let binding. Is that right? Is that what we're saying here? And let binding.
It's an application.
Or is it's an application, not a let binding?
It really is an application of a function to arguments, yes.
Because I would, really kind of makes sense to me that it'd be a let binding. But there's something going on there.
But what? Yeah, no, it's an application. I'm pretty sure. Of course, the system with cuts isn't straightforwardly, a programming language with lambdas and etc.
Well, anyway, a let binding to me is like very straightforwardly a notion of like sharing. That is kind of like the syntactic reification of sharing that happens in programming languages.
And you can at least concede that can be simulated with a lambda.
Yes, it can be simulated with a lambda in application.
Great. All right, so we agree on that. I'm not sure we agree that without having these lambdas in applications, it's pretty obvious that you can't write a proof of false. But okay, I'll trust your intuition to the fact that if any proof of an inductive type has to be an application of the constructor, then false doesn't have any constructors, and so it's going to be hard to have those.
Okay.
but you're taking me on faith. All right, and then the fact that the simply typed lambda calculus, or a slightly more complicated calculus that represents, predicate logic with for alls and exists, that is basically the simply typed calculus. And what I'm saying here is there's a way to eliminate all these lambdas, and you can do it by appealing to omega times omega, or lexicographic ordering. And it's a little subtle, but you can. And so if you trust the fact that lex ordering obviously, decreases things in a well-founded way, then you can trust that this process is going to terminate and give you a proof that is, cut-free or has no lambdas inside applications.
Was there anybody who ever suspected this system would be inconsistent?
No, but what happened, okay, and this is kind of an interesting historical point that I'm going to try and finish on. What happened is people knew, oh yes, this is obviously consistent. Let's try and prove the consistency of much more powerful systems that have quantifiers over subsets and stuff like that. They completely failed to do that. This seemed really, really hard. So they did what mathematicians do, which is take the simplest problem that is similar and that you don't know how to solve. This is a great idea if you're a mathematician, right? You're trying to solve a hard problem. It seems impossible. You're sort of discouraged. You say, okay, well, what can I do? And then you take the simplest thing you can't do and you do that. And then you feel great about yourself. And it gives you ideas on how to build up to the complicated thing. Now, it turns out you couldn't do that because of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. But for a while, people were really trying to build up this, let's prove that, quantifier-free logic is consistent. Okay, now let's prove that, logic with quantifiers is consistent. Okay, now let's prove that, arithmetic, where you can only do induction on quantifier-free terms, is consistent. Okay, now let's do piano arithmetic. Let's do, a little bit more. Let's do second order. Let's do, high order. And I think this is a legitimate thing that people are still trying to do, is to find ordinals to assign to these stronger and stronger theories. So, yeah, nobody really doubted that arithmetic was consistent, but it's definitely true that, first of all, in retrospect, it's not at all obvious.
Is what we're talking about arithmetic?
It's not. It's first order logic.
Okay.
But that's the baby one. That's the one where I actually understand the proof. Arithmetic, the proof becomes actually a little bit subtle. I don't really understand it. And, then the state of the art is some fragment of second order logic. Mm-hmm. I think the fragment where people are doing active research right now is something called pi 1-1 comprehension. I think that, or maybe I'm a little antiquated, but around there, like quantifying over simple second order sets. All right. With that said, I think there's plenty more to say here, but I'm going to leave it for now, and take care.